Series 3, Part 5, The Final Confrontation. The silence that had hung over Olivia and Samuel in the past few days was deafening. The calm before the storm. But they both knew that the time for running was over. The choices they had made, the love they had fought for, it was all coming to a head now. Their pasts, their mistakes, the enemies they had made, and the lies they had once hidden were no longer distant shadows. They were standing face to face with the consequences. Olivia stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker beneath the night sky. The world outside was still, yet inside, everything seemed to be teetering on the edge. Samuel sat behind her, his eyes reflecting the same tension, the same unease. The walls were closing in. But despite it all, there was a flicker of something else in his chest, a fierce, unyielding determination to protect Olivia and their future together. Samuel rose from his chair and walked over to where Olivia stood. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, and she turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. They had come so far, too far to turn back now. Samuel, his voice quiet but firm. "We fought for this, Olivia. We fought for us. And now, we finish it. Together." Olivia met his gaze, her heart racing but her resolve clear. "We don't have a choice anymore, Samuel. Adrian won't stop. And neither will Marcus. But we've made it this far, and we're going to fight until the end." The weight of the decision, the weight of everything they were about to face, was heavier than ever. But together, they knew they could endure. They had to. The plan was set. The time to confront Adrian and Marcus had come. Samuel and Olivia knew it wouldn't be easy. They had already been warned by Jonah and by everyone they had come into contact with in the past few weeks. The cost of redemption was steep, and it wasn't just about fighting their enemies. It was about confronting the demons within themselves and deciding if they could live with the consequences of their actions. The night of the confrontation arrived, and the air was thick with tension. Samuel had reached out to some old contacts, those still loyal to him, still willing to do whatever it took to take down Adrian and Marcus. But the game had changed. Adrian and Marcus were more dangerous than ever, and they wouldn't be caught off guard. The meeting was set in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city, a place Samuel knew well. It was the kind of place where deals were made in the dark, where betrayal was as common as the dust in the air. But tonight, it wouldn't be a meeting for business, it would be the final showdown. As Samuel and Olivia arrived, their hearts pounded with the knowledge that this was the moment they had been building toward. Everything that had happened in the past, the love, the betrayal, the choices, had led them to this point. And now, it was time to face the people who had manipulated their lives. The warehouse doors creaked open, and Samuel stepped inside, with Olivia close behind him. Their footsteps echoed in the silence. It felt like they were walking into the very heart of the storm. Adrian's voice, cutting through the darkness, his tone amused. "You finally come. I was beginning to think you'd run away, Samuel. But then again, you never were good at staying away from the game." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. His focus was on the man standing in the shadows, Adrian. And beside him, as expected, stood Marcus, his eyes cold, calculating. Marcus, his voice calm but with an edge of menace. "You should have known, Samuel. You should have known you'd never be free. Not from me. Not from your past." Samuel's heart raced, the old wounds reopening as he faced the men who had once been part of his life. He had spent so long running from them, trying to build something better, something pure. But here they were, his past, his mistakes, standing in front of him. Olivia, stepping forward, her voice unwavering. "We're not afraid of you anymore. You think you control us, but we're taking our lives back. Whatever it costs." Adrian and Marcus exchanged a look, one that spoke volumes. They were no longer in control. But that didn't mean they wouldn't try to reclaim it. Adrian, sneering, "You think you've won? You're nothing but pawns in a game you don't understand. And now, you're going to pay the price for trying to escape." Before Samuel could respond, there was a sudden movement. A figure stepped out from the shadows, someone Samuel hadn't expected to see. Jonah. But this time, it wasn't the same Jonah Samuel had known. His eyes were cold, his face hard. And in his hand, he held a gun, aimed directly at Samuel. "Jonah," his voice filled with regret, but a sense of finality. "I didn't want it to come to this, Samuel. But you've made your choices. And now, you're going to have to live with them." The gun's barrel gleamed in the dim light, the tension thickening with every passing second. Samuel's pulse quickened, and Olivia stepped closer to him, her hand gripping his tightly. They were cornered, trapped in a fight they hadn't asked for, but one they had no choice but to fight. The final confrontation had arrived. But just as the tension reached its peak, there was a sudden sound, the roar of an engine approaching. The doors of the warehouse slammed open, and in the distance, headlights flashed across the darkened floor. A group of figures appeared, stepping into the fray. It was Samuel's allies, those who had remained loyal, those who had followed his lead. Jonah hesitated, his grip tightening on the gun, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The shift in the room was palpable. What had once been a fight between two men now turned into a battle between two sides. "Samuel," his voice hard, his eyes never leaving Jonah. "You don't have to do this, Jonah. We don't have to keep fighting. There's another way." Jonah's expression faltered, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The game they had been forced to play was far from over, and the consequences of their choices were just beginning to unfold. But as the standoff continued, Samuel knew one thing for sure. The price of redemption was not just survival. It was the realization that some things, once lost, could never truly be reclaimed. In the end, they would either win together or lose everything. The standoff stretched on, the air thick with tension as the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Samuel's allies were closing in, but the room still felt like it was teetering on the edge of chaos. Jonah's gun was still aimed at Samuel, and Olivia, standing beside him, knew that any wrong move could turn this moment into something far worse than they'd imagined. Jonah stood frozen, his expression a mixture of guilt and uncertainty, as his eyes flicked between Samuel and the newly arrived group of figures. It was clear he was conflicted. He had been Samuel's ally, his friend, and now, with the gun in his hands, he was caught between the past and the present. Samuel saw the hesitation in his old friend's eyes. He had known Jonah long enough to recognize the internal struggle that was playing out. "Samuel," his voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "Jonah, you don't have to do this. You don't have to choose this life." Jonah's grip on the gun tightened, but his hands were shaking slightly. His eyes were darting nervously, his mind clearly racing with the weight of the decision in front of him. But he didn't lower the gun. Not yet. "Jonah," his voice tight, filled with regret. "You don't understand, Samuel. It's too late for us. You've already made your choice. There's no going back." The sound of heavy boots stepping closer filled the space between them. The figures of Samuel's allies, who had once been a part of his dark world but now stood beside him in his fight for redemption, entered the warehouse. Their faces were determined, eyes filled with purpose. They were ready to fight for their lives, for the future that had been taken from them by people like Marcus and Adrian. But there was no room for hesitation now. The game had already shifted, and the consequences of the choices they had made would soon catch up to them. Olivia, her voice rising, steady and resolute.
Jonah, put the gun down. We don't have to fight. We can end this.
Jonah's eyes flicked to her. She had always been the wild card in their dangerous world, a beacon of light in a world too dark. But even Olivia's words couldn't change the reality of the situation. The gun was still in Jonah's hands, and the tension between them was palpable. Marcus, standing from the shadows, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Enough. This has gone on long enough. You can't escape what's coming. You can't hide from your past, Samuel. You'll never be free. Marcus's words were calculated, his tone dripping with malice. He had always been a man who thrived on control, on manipulation. And now, with Samuel and Olivia standing before him, he knew the moment of victory was close. He had been waiting for this, waiting for Samuel to fall, for the perfect moment to seize everything they had worked so hard to build. But Samuel wasn't the man Marcus had once known. No, Samuel was different now, stronger, more determined. Samuel, his voice hard but filled with a deep resolve. Don't flatter yourself, Marcus. This ends tonight. Whatever you think you've built, whatever power you think you have, it's over. Samuel's allies began to move forward, positioning themselves strategically, ready to fight back. But it was clear, the real battle wasn't with Marcus or Adrian anymore. It was about proving to themselves that they could overcome their past, that they could finally break free of the chains that had held them down for so long. Adrian, his voice cold, mocking. You think you can defeat me, Samuel? You think you've won? This is just the beginning. Adrian's words were an echo of everything Samuel had been fighting against. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving that the love they shared, the strength they had found in one another, was worth fighting for. This was no longer just about protecting themselves. It was about taking back their future. As the seconds stretched out in the warehouse, Samuel's heart raced. This wasn't just a battle for love. It was a fight for redemption. They had all made choices that had led them to this moment. But now, they had to decide what kind of people they would be once the dust settled. Could they rebuild their lives from the wreckage, or would their pasts destroy them? Samuel stepped forward, his resolve unshakable. Samuel, his voice loud and clear, addressing Adrian and Marcus directly. This is where it ends. You're no longer in control. You never were. We're taking our lives back, and we're done running. With that, Samuel's allies surged forward, moving to face Adrian and Marcus. The battle had begun, and everything they had worked for was on the line. Every decision they had made in the past was now coming to fruition. This was the final stand. Olivia, stepping close to Samuel, her voice steady as she stood beside him. We're in this together, Samuel. No matter what happens, we fight until the end. The sound of chaos erupted as Samuel's allies clashed with Marcus's men. But in the midst of it all, Samuel and Olivia stood firm, their hearts beating in sync. They had reached the point of no return. And as they looked into each other's eyes, they knew that no matter what the outcome, they had chosen each other. They had chosen love over fear, redemption over destruction. As the fight raged on, Samuel knew one thing for certain. This was their final confrontation. No more hiding, no more running. This was their battle for freedom, and they would face it with everything they had. In the midst of the chaos, the sound of a gunshot rang out. The world seemed to stop for a moment as everyone froze. Olivia's heart skipped a beat, her eyes locking onto Samuel, who staggered back slightly, a sharp pain coursing through his side. But in the brief moment of shock, Samuel's grip tightened, and he refused to fall. He turned to Olivia, his voice hoarse but unwavering. "Samuel," through gritted teeth, fighting through the pain.
"This ends now.
"We finish this together." Olivia's heart clenched as she rushed to his side, helping him stay on his feet. The battle was still ongoing, but in that moment, they knew they had one last chance.
And they were going to take it.